Thank you to Ms. Rath and Dr. Felder and to everyone who helped prepare for today. So just a couple of things about the budget committee in general. Ms. Rath, Dr. Felder, feel free to add anything here, just since this is our first meeting of the year. These calls are our chance to dive deeper into the budget than we really have a chance to do during board meetings. They're also a really important point of partnership between the board and the superintendent as the superintendent prepares each year a budget proposal to bring before the board and then eventually the county commissioners. And then there also are opportunity at regular points to understand where the budget stands and how we're doing against that. In this particular moment, what felt really important was understanding, we passed, well, I don't think we actually officially, we passed a recommendation to the county commissioners back in June, May, something like that. And a lot of things have changed since then in terms of our costs and in terms of our revenues, in terms of additional state funding and things like that. So it felt important to understand sort of where do we stand right now with our budget and including fund balance so that as a board we can make good decisions and trade-offs as we are considering all of these other potential costs that may be coming. So that is where Ms. Rath is going to focus today, is helping us have that deeper understanding. Lots of opportunity for us to jump in and ask questions. Committees are more informal than board meetings, so we should feel free to just do that. And let me see. And the other thing that I want to save time for is also just to understand from the committee, what are our priorities in terms of the budget and how we want to spend our time in these meetings, what sorts of things are important to you, so that when I work with Ms. Rath and Dr. Felder on the sequence of meetings throughout the year, that we're able to address some of those topics as well. So I think that's about all I had as by way of introduction. Any questions from anyone before we dive in and I pass it off to Ms. Rath? I'm going to take silence as a no. Okay, great. Ms. Rath, why don't I pass it over to you?
All right, fantastic. Thanks so much. It's awesome to see everybody this morning. And I wanted to take a moment, she's going to kill me before I get started, but I wanted to introduce Lorinda Cecil that you'll see on the screen. She is our Assistant Finance Officer, and I refer to her quite frequently as my subject matter expert. So she is here to support us in the event that there are specific questions that are down in the weeds and the nitty gritty. Lorinda's really good. And so thank you, Lorinda, for being here. And I just wanted to introduce her to you guys so that you would know who she is. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, I hope that you are seeing a full screen of the our road here as we begin to make our journey. This kind of spoke to me as a we're in a new normal and we're kind of headed in a new direction and a new journey. And this is a very peaceful picture to me because that's the way I want this whole process to be, is peaceful. And I think it will be. And we have a great team. And I look forward to the discussions that we are going to have today. So let's get started. So I'm going to start giving you an overall look at our budget, and my intent of our meeting today is to start laying the groundwork and the foundation for us to have a final approved budget, hopefully by our last meeting in September. And that is my goal. Of course, we will work towards that or do as we need to do for this. As Ms. Smiley pointed out, this process started back actually last December of 2019 is where we started planning and preparing for our budget. We made a request to our county commissioners in April, and then from there, they had budget sessions where they had community members come in and speak, and they voted on a final budget for us, which was approved at their June 8th meeting, I believe it was. And then the next step was our state piece of the budget. And of course, legislation has not been passed in regards to that yet. We do have some mini bills, but we do have our state allotments, which are what you will see as our state budget that is here today and that we will talk about as well. So our budget is comprised of primarily the 5 categories that you see here, which consist of state funding sources, our local funding sources, which are the budget approved by our county commissioners, our federal grants, which are primarily composed of our Title I funds, our capital funds, which also come from the county in the form of our capital improvement plan, recurring capital, bonds, deferred maintenance. And then there is Fund 8, which we refer to as our restricted category. This fund is comprised of grants that we receive that are for specific purposes, as well as funding sources that we may receive that are specific. For example, our county commissioners graciously fund a nurse for us in every one of our schools. That is a set funding that is based upon our actual charges. They actually reimburse us for what it costs for those nurses. So that is a restricted, specified funding source. Other examples, we have a Burroughs Welcome Grant that you may be familiar with, a STEM and engineering grant. That is also kept in this restricted fund, as well as our NC Pre-K and the Medicaid reimbursements that we receive for our Medicaid students. Those are also kept in this grant in Fund 8. So of our budget at this point in time that I would like to move forward with bringing as a final approval again in September is a total budget of $126.8 million.
Can I just ask a question? I guess
Go ahead.
They, most schools are measured in terms of their per pupil spending. And which of these categories are included in that?
Well, great question, Ms. Hauser. They look at our per pupil spending in the state funds, the local funds, and the federal funds. And we actually track those charges where we can to the specific locations, so that on our report card each year, they have started reporting a per pupil by location. So that is in funds 1, 2, and 3. There are some funds that are spread, that, for example, transportation services, but they will spread those based upon ADM for the total district.
Okay,
did that answer your question?
Well, it does. And just so from my perspective for budgeting and management processes, it's helpful to me, and I'm more accustomed to see operating separate from capital and discussed as separate budgets as opposed to combining them as one budget item, because they're so different. The capital, as you know, is one time, whereas the per pupil spending is a measure of the fiscal health of the organization. So I just want to consider, just to throw that out there. This is very helpful. Thank you.
No, thank you for that input. All right, so now as I go forward through this presentation, I'm going to take some time to hit primarily our largest funding resources. We'll talk about federal as well, but federal is primarily composed of Title I funds. That's the largest component of those. So I'm going to spend more time in our state and local because there are multiple components in each of those funding sources. And I hope to be able to give you some ground information and help an understanding of those funding sources and how we receive those dollars. So I'll begin with the State Public School Fund, and we receive these funds in the form of allotments that are provided to us from the Department of Public Instruction, and they allot to us based on formulas that are based on interpretation of state and federal laws. And the bills that are passed in our legislation is how those allotments are determined and provided to us. We get them in three primary categories. There's position allotments, which basically covers an entire position, which is your total salary for that position, as well as the associated benefits. We receive our classroom teachers as well as instructional support in the form of position allotments. We also have allotments that come to us in months of employment, and that is for our principals, assistant principals, and our CT teachers come to those in that form. They look at the number of months for these positions, and they allot us based upon the months. And then the final category is just straight dollars, which are, we get those in categorical allotments, which our dollars are in transportation, EC, teacher assistants. All of those come to us in pots specified for those areas, but they come to us in the form of dollars. What's important here that I think I wanted everyone to have an understanding of is when we look at position allotments, this enables us to strategically place, in all transparency, we work to place our highest paid teachers in our state teaching position allotments because it allows us to recover their salaries as well as all of their associated benefits. So that provides us an ability to really maximize our funding from those sources, where if they were in the form of a dollar allotment, we would be approaching that in a different manner and much more strategically and have to look at, you know, the dollars associated with positions and to strategically shift them in regards to that. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I don't remember exactly the number, but let's say we're down 10 teachers, right? So we started the year with fewer teachers than we're allotted. Where does that money come from and where does it go?
Okay, so if our allotments, and let me go here. I'm going to start here if you don't mind.
Sure. Great. Sorry, in my head.
No, that's great. You set me up for my next slide. So if our position allotments are reduced from the state, for example, you know, we talked a lot about our concern of the Adm reduction that is in legislation that thankfully House Bill 1105 was passed and is law that holds us harmless for this fiscal year for any reductions in our ADM. Typically, DPI looks at month 1 and month 2, which would be day 20 and day 40. They compare that to what they projected for us to be. And if there is a either a 2% or at least 100 increase or decrease from our projected amount, they will make an adjustment to us. So if that occurred, what would happen is we would have state funding reverted for, let's use the example of 10 positions that would be shifted. We would not have those funding sources from our state dollars. We would have to shift those to our local sources, or else we would have to freeze the positions in the event that there were any positions that we could identify that were vacant. We would look to freeze those positions in as long as there was not a need based upon our class size numbers. However, if there is the need, we would have to shift those to local, and our local budget would have to pick up those funds.
Okay,
So-
so,
Go ahead.
no, so now we started the year with fewer teachers than we needed, so I don't know if those were, let me ask a more basic question. Is our teaching staff, including all these positions, do we staff above the allotment or do we staff at the allotment?
Okay, as you will see from this slide here, thank you, you're just setting me right up. We were allotted 343 classroom teaching positions from our state dollars. In total, we actually have 517 in the district as a total. So the difference there is funded, some of those are funded through Title I dollars as Title I positions, and some of those are also funded from our local sources. So in the event that, as we stated, if we lose funding there, it would have to shift to these other sources if we kept those positions.
And so just to follow up on Bonnie's question, if we have vacant positions at the start of the year, you're using all of those state allotments, right? Those would be sort of sitting.
Yes, ma'am.
In our local dollars. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. That's where my subject matter expert is really helpful and really great. We are constantly looking at those positions, and we do use what they give us. We will not let those positions revert. And so what that means is that a lot of times we are shifting people between local and state to make sure that we are maximizing those resources. So, those vacancies primarily will sit in our local dollars.
So the essence of I'll give you a technical term in budgeting. It's called wiggle room. And the question is, we don't really have wiggle room in the state. I think you've used it all. You said we're going to put all the highest paid people in the state funds and I just did my board training on that, and that they'll pay what we use. So that's great. Then we don't have much wiggle room with the Title I funds either. They're going to give it to us based on our Title I declaration. So the wiggle room is in the local funds. So roughly of the 517 or the 73 positions, I guess, how many roughly are coming out of our local funds? Because that's where we have the wiggle room, right?
Right. Roughly of the classroom teaching positions, of that 174, I would guess between probably around 150 of those are coming out of our local budget. And for our instructional support, I would say the majority of those 38 positions would be coming out of our local funds of that difference.
Okay. All right, so if I could answer, so then the answer to my question is the shortage or the open positions, are they coming out of the local funds?
Any positions that are vacant,
Yeah.
we will, yes. We will, those lapsed salaries will be accumulating in our local funds.
Great, thank you.
All right, great questions, thank you. So now I'm going to peel the onion back just a little bit more here in regards to our state allotments and share with you exactly how these look. These are the actual allotments that we receive from the Department of Public Instruction, and this is actually what our current budget is for the state in each of these categories. As you can see, our allotments come to us in specific areas, in specific, I like to refer to them as pots of money. And as a result of our allotments in this manner, there's really not much flexibility. For example, Teacher assistants, you will see there is a dollar allotment that we receive. There was a point in time in our world where we were able to shift dollars from teacher assistants to classroom teachers, where districts were able to make the decision that, we would rather have a classroom teacher and utilize those funds and shift them to classroom teachers. Well, we no longer have that flexibility. In each of these categories that you see here, we are tied to those dollars in those categories. So, for example, teacher assistants, let's say this is not what's happening, but let's just say we had enough vacancies across the district where I did not utilize all of my teacher assistant dollars for this coming fiscal year. And I would have some of those dollars would be in jeopardy of reverting, i.e. I wouldn't use them by the end of the year. I would not be able to transfer those dollars into any other category and utilize them. If I could not apply them to teacher assistant positions, the state would take those dollars back. That is pretty much the case for all of these allotments. We do have a little bit of flexibility in textbooks. That allotment there was established back in the day when districts used to use the state textbook warehouse and actually purchase hard textbooks through that allotment. We have the flexibility now to actually move that to classroom materials and instructional supplies, but we primarily use ours for curriculum and textbooks, digital resources. So that's where we shift a lot of those dollars in regards to that.
Rhonda, can I ask one question here? The children with special needs category, within that, how is that money spent? And do you have sort of flexibility for different ways you can spend that?
So the children with special needs, that represents our exceptional children that are exceptional children identified in Orange County schools, and that allotment is based upon the number of kids that are identified. We utilize the state dollars to fund, and thank you, Connie, for coming on. Those support personnel. The state dollars are basically allotted all to personnel for our EC program. We utilize our Medicaid funds in our restricted fund that we talked about at the very beginning. The Medicaid reimbursements that we receive for our Medicaid students, that's where we utilize those funds for contracted services. And that may be bringing in speech pathologists, audiological individuals. That's where we utilize those funds. But in regards to, and I don't know, Connie, if you want to chime in, but the children with special needs or our state fund is going to be all personnel. She's looking for her unmute button, I see.
It's funny, you don't look muted though, Karen.
I know she doesn't look muted. I don't know if she has a headset plugged in. Do you have a I constantly do not unplug my little device for my headset. There you go.
That no one can hear me. It's very bizarre. So with the state funding for special education services, because it is not able to be carried over from year to year and it will be reverted to the state, we try to put as much personnel into the state funds as necessary. With special ed, it is important to note that we don't have positions, so we have to be mindful that everyone is a dollar amount. So playing with the dollars to try to maximize. So the more we can put in state, it seems like our federal, which does have carryover ability, and local to try to max those out, because we then can use our federal monies as sort of a savings account or a rainy day fund, because those funds will carry over for 27 months.
So the exceptional children's teachers, you don't get sort of classroom teacher allotment. It is just fully in a different category.
It is
Yes,
all
ma'am.
money. It is all money based. So if we have a veteran staff, then the money doesn't go as far. If we have a new staff or a less veteran staff, the money will go further because they're not as expensive. So that is one little budgeting trick to do with special ed, is to find out how to maximize those dollars.
And we did go through a scenario a couple of years ago where we took a look at trying to find ways to maximize and save the district funds. We do have some veteran higher paid EC teachers that are in the classroom teacher position allotment, because we are able to we were able to shift them there to recoup more money, but by no means are we able to do that for all of the staff and all of the teaching positions that she needs for that program.
Ms. Crimmins, could
Yes.
you give an example of the type of use that the rainy day type funds would end up being for?
So particularly, we would use that for equipment. So it's any specialized equipment we will use that rainy day fund for. Sometimes we will have students who come into the district with a higher need, and we will use that sometimes if they need a personal care assistant, or we've had students who move into the district and they need a stander, or they need a specialized chair to sit in, a Riften chair. So sometimes it will be more of those types of things. Or we have parents that will request an independent educational evaluation due to particular reasons, and so it does go into some contracts. Also, if we are so to say, down school psychologists, or if we have a vacant position where we need to fill it, such as a speech language pathologist, we will use those funding sources as contracts.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
How many kids do we have in the district that qualify under as special needs, and is this funding based on that?
So yes, the funding is based on that, and we had our April 1 child count 1,089 students.
But it is capped.
Yes, and yes, that's a whole other explanation, but the long and the short of it is that our state funds are capped at 12.75 of our ADM, or if your special ed population is less than 12.75, they will fund up to the ADM that you, or the amount of special education students that you have.
So at 1089, are we at the cap?
We exceed the cap, yes.
Okay.
We exceed it, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Connie. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so next I would like to share with you our CARES funding that we have received to date. And these are coming through to us in the form of allotments, and they're flowing through us from the Department of Public Instruction in allotment categories. And I've shared a few of these in our weekly updates, and I wanted to take some time today also to talk with you again about what those allotments are in each of these categories. And the next steps that we're going to go into is I'm going to talk with you about the plans for spending these dollars and how we will utilize them. But as you can see here, this is what we have received to this point of those CARES funds that were legislated to be distributed to the districts. This is our portion up to this point that we have received, and in each of the categories. And by them being in these categories, once again, it makes them much more specific and less flexibility. For example, I cannot move, or we cannot move from cybersecurity to student computers and devices. I don't have the flexibility within our chart of accounts to allow for that. Okay, so okay, yes, ma'am.
Can I ask, so have we, two questions about that. Have we spent any of that money yet? And then do we expect to get more CARES allotment? I saw something, I think maybe in a recent weekly update about the gear funding for things like counselors, mental health.
Yes,
so do you have a sense of how much more we expect to be coming? And then also, what of this have we spent already?
Fantastic. You once again have done a great job of setting me up as we go forward. I'm going to talk with you about what we've spent. And
I think this is just you planning a really good narrative arc here, Ms. Rath. So.
Well, you guys are doing a great job. We'll talk about what we've spent, and then when I get to the end of this, I will share with you what I learned late yesterday that I did not have an opportunity to update the slides for regarding the gear funding. So of the allotments that we have received to this point, the $361,000 that we have received in our summer learning allotment, $170,000 of that has been expended and was expended in support of our summer programs that we did for the month of, I believe, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I believe it was July and maybe into a little bit of August for those virtual summer programs that we conducted. $170,000 was expended for that. Of the remaining funds, the plan is to utilize them for professional development with a primary focus on our K2, K3 teachers and staff in that area, as well as curriculum resources. We have ability to utilize those funds through December the 30th of this fiscal year. So our plan and our goal is to utilize those funds in that manner and, of course, to deplete them and not let them revert. Of the allotment that we received from CARES for our student computers and devices, as well as our personal computers and devices, the plan at this time is to utilize those funds towards the device refresh that we currently signed the contract for back in, I believe it was July, August timeframe, for those new devices for everyone in the district. If you recall, we financed $3 million of that, and there was roughly $1.5 million that we did not finance, that we would have to utilize some carryover balances that we had in our technology capital accounts. What I would like to do is to utilize these state dollars, since they do expire on December the 30th, to apply towards those and to be able to keep some of those capital balances for additional technology needs as we continue through the remainder of this school year. The home and community Wi-Fi allotment that we received in the amount of $41,478, that allotment was very specific and could only be utilized for the purchases of devices. We could not use it for any of the subscription services or anything other than the actual device. So we utilized those funds to purchase an additional 400 hotspots that have been purchased and are in the process of being distributed if they have not already been distributed to our families. Again, that cost can only be utilized for that actual device. There's a device charge, and then there's also a monthly fee for the internet access that we also are paying, but that could not be utilized in this allotment. And this allotment also expires on December the 30th. But of course, we've utilized all of that one.
So I have two questions. One is the law that was just approved included more money for schools. Did we get any of that? And is that in these numbers?
That is not in these numbers yet because we have not received those funds yet.
Are we expecting to?
Yes, based upon the law, and you were spot on that there was additional funds that are to be allotted to school districts for home and community Wi-Fi. Not received any indication at this point of what our piece of that allotment would be, or even how they are developing that formula. But we should anticipate receiving additional funds.
Okay, we just don't know how much. And that I guess, okay.
Ms. Rath,
Yes.
when referring to the student computers and devices, I'm sorry, I have my video off because I have a bunch of kids on Zoom.
I understand.
But, so referring to the 115,000 with the student computers and devices, did you say, I think you said there's a larger number that we had to fund differently? Did you say the total cost of that was closer, what did you say, $1 million? What did you say?
1.5 million. The actual total contract for us to do the device refresh for the entire district was 4.5 million. And that was for staff devices as well as student devices. We financed 3 million of that, and the way that the financing is structured, it's an installment purchase where we make a one-time annual installment on that $3 million. That installment is coming from the quarter-cent sales tax that the county allots to us as our portion of the quarter-cent sales tax revenues that are collected in Orange County. They look at ADM for Orange County and Chapel Hill, which I think is close to a 60-40 split right now. Those total sales received, 40% would come to Orange County schools and 60% of it would go to Chapel Hill, Carrboro City schools. Our annual installment on these devices is set up where at the reduced sales bracket that we are currently in based upon closures associated with COVID, that payment will be covered from that revenue source.
Okay.
So the 1.5 million is the money that we had to come up with from other sources, and those other sources were capital technology funds. I am wanting to use my recommendation would be that we would use these funds because they're state dollars that we will lose in December to apply towards that $1.4 million and be able to save some of those capital technology balances. Did that make sense?
Yes, it
Did that answer your
does.
question?
And yes, the only lingering part of my question would be, which I didn't say yet, was how much is this a cost that we also would have had if we didn't have the need for remote learning? I mean, is some of that 4.5 million, we might have needed a contract for some size anyway this year, right? Or
Yes, ma'am. And from my lens and in my opinion, it was time for us to do a device refresh. The technology in the hands of our students as a one-to-one district was 4 years old. So we had come up even pre-COVID where we were on the path to do a refresh this year.
thank you so much.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you.
I have just, first of all, on Carrie's question, but K1 and 2 wasn't part of the refresh, right? So that's in addition, I think, right?
I see Dr. Dawson is on here, and I may punt to her if I need to. From my understanding, kindergarten devices were the only ones that were not included in this refresh cycle. The one that we're currently in. Previously, our previous refresh cycle, there were not devices for K2. but this cycle did have all new devices other than kindergarten. And the kindergarten are utilizing the iPads. Is that correct, Dr. Dawson?
Yes, that would be correct.
Thank you.
And if I just want to throw a wild number out there, if we need, so it's possible that we need another 500 or so we have to go find the money for that if we need that.
That is
And that would also
correct.
be for, yes.
And I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit later in this presentation.
Okay, great. No, because
So
that to me is a budget challenge, right? Is the need, what do we need? And now where are we going to find the money to pay for it?
Yes, ma'am. Spot on.
Cool.
Okay, so finishing out the CARES funding that we've received in the form of state allotments to date, you will see here that we also received some additional dollars for our exceptional children. And we have a plan and will utilize and spend these dollars to support remote learning for our students, and particularly our highest need students. That $77,000 will be expended in support of that. That primarily, I believe, was in supplies and technologies with some assistive technology, some teletherapy, and those types of contracted services to support those students in this environment. The school nutrition funds that we received from the CARES Act, we are utilizing those funds for our drivers that are delivering meals currently to their hourly rate to drive those buses. But because we did not have the flexibility in transportation until the law just passed, we were utilizing these school nutrition CARES fundings to be able to do that. We also utilize these dollars to offset losses in the child nutrition program as allowable. It is very restrictive in what we can count towards determining if the child nutrition program is in a loss. For example, last when we were in COVID, when these funds were first given to us in the March, April timeframe, we had a lot of staff who qualified for the emergency sick leave and actually took advantage of that. Well, the child nutrition program still bore the cost because those people being on approved state emergency sick leave, they were in a paid status. However, we were not allowed to utilize those costs in looking at the losses for that program. I know I said a lot there and it's very confusing, but I just wanted to share about it's, we are restricted in what we can actually count towards the loss of that program. Our final categories here, we are looking at and developing plans to spend these dollars. There's $47,000 that was allotted to us for school health support. That is it can only be utilized for contracted services. It cannot be utilized to actually fund a position or bring somebody in. So we are looking at the best ways to leverage those dollars with fidelity in support of our students and staff, especially on our social and emotional level. We got a little bit of funds for non-digital resources in the amount of $14,000. And these funds are very restrictive. They basically can only be utilized for printing. So the plan, we've not been we're not printing packets like we were previously at the end of last school year for students. We're providing the thumb drives and the flash drives and providing our students with the technology and really working to allow them to access everything that they need through these means. However, should we have to use printing or print packets, those funds will be utilized for that. They do expire at the end of December. should we not have a need for printing curriculum as a result of COVID, we will be able to refund our local dollars that were already expended between the March and June timeframe. As you recall, we had quite a hefty bill from March to June associated with printing packets and actually distributing hard copies of those packets. We will try to utilize and work to utilize those dollars for the needs now, and in particular in our EC area and in any of those areas where our students just need that additional support and may need those actual paper copies, that's what we would utilize those funds for. And finally, cybersecurity. I get with the influx of fraud, the influx of malware and those types of things, our state legislators had a small piece of money that they designated for cybersecurity to provide to districts to allow them to pursue options to look at beefing up any of their internal programs or hardware. Not much can be done with $12,000 in this area in regards to that, but we are taking a real good look at that and looking for ways to utilize those funds.
Just something on that last one, which I'm sure you all are seeing, just all of these districts that are having like ransomware attacks and things. It's been happening a lot. So it has led me to the question of how secure we are against things like that. But yeah, $12,000 isn't a lot of money to do much.
Yes, trying not to be ungrateful for what we do receive, but in the technology world, in security, $12,000 does not go far. But we will be looking to utilize those funds and actually pursuing if there's any way that we may be able to leverage them for the the work that we're doing with the vestibules and all of the security and the monitoring systems that are being put in place for that.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I don't know who it was yesterday. It was on the news that a school district had a ransomware attack. Orange County had 2 last year. I don't know what the number should be, but if our systems are not secure, certainly we should look at what it takes to make them secure.
Yeah,
agree. No, I agree. I'm not concerned in regards to, in particular, the security of our financial software. And I know a lot of it has to do with the user and, educating staff to not open attachments or certain documents from unfamiliar sources. And, I know that's a huge component of combating that as well. All right, so moving on. So let's take a look at where we stand for the first quarter in our state funds and where we were this time last year. So our first graph here is July through September. And of course, this September is a projection. Have a real good feel of personnel, which is our payroll costs, because we have ran our first payroll for the year. And as we know, that's primarily our largest contributor to our budget is our personnel. And estimating for the month of September and what has already been spent for July and August, that's roughly $8.8 million of our $49.2 million budget that we have expended. That's a little bit below where we would need to be if you divided it in 4 equal quarters. However, typically, as you can see, looking at last year, our spending is not at the 25% in the first quarter. School doesn't typically start until late in August. So you're only looking primarily at a month and a half, a lot of times, of expenditures. And so typically in this next quarter is where we will see our expenditures get more in line with the 50% mark that we should be at by December.
So just a couple questions. Why is the budget less this year than it was last year? It's
Great
$500,000.
The $500,000. At this point in time, a lot of that is associated with those guaranteed allotments that we should be receiving later in the fiscal year. The $49.7 million was our ending budget for last fiscal year, and that would include allotments that we would have received based upon legislation that may have been passed later in the year. And in particular, what's coming to my mind, Ms. Hauser, is the principal bonuses as well as those teacher bonuses that will be guaranteed allotments that we will receive at that time. And we did take a reduction in our technology allotment to the tune of roughly about $120,000 or $150,000. That state allotment was reduced this fiscal year. At this point, that's really the only allotment that was significantly reduced.
Got it. So it's possible that by the end of the year we'll see more money. If you had, I don't know if you have the number, if you had the beginning budget for 2019-20, do you know what that number might have been? It's not really that important. I'm just curious how much came through on those allotments.
No, you're great, and that's great, and you ask a great question, and I should be able to give you a ballpark of this exact time frame last year.
And what I'm seeing, and again, this is only the start, is we're running $600,000 below last year, and that's just in the first quarter.
And that's primarily as a result of transportation costs will be the biggest component of those costs, because we're not running our buses to pick up students, and we don't have those costs associated with the drivers and the monitors. That is a large piece of that budget, as well as typically in the beginning of the year there are some our travel is down across the district. Our workshops and conference attendances are down across the district. And historically, it's usually at the beginning of the school year, before school starts, or at the end of the school year when a lot of our teaching staff are attending those events. And so, we did not have a lot of those costs this fiscal year as well. But the biggest portion of it is our transportation.
So just to help, and I don't know what Sarah and Carrie are getting, but what I hear all the time, and especially around the supervised learning lab and some of the other things we're doing, is you guys, meaning us, are operating with closed schools. Where's the money going? What are you going to do with it? Also, if we talk to the county commissioners or we need more money for stuff, we've got to be able to answer as a district, what are we doing with the money that we have? So that's kind of, just so you know where I'm coming from, that's the questions that we have to be prepared, and I don't know if Carrie and Sarah are getting the same questions. Those are questions that I get. And we have some decisions to make about the learning. And so part of the question about that money is how much of it could we use for something else? So that's going to be, we just want to content.
And if you recall, Ms. Hauser, when we looked at the very beginning, I appreciate that question. And what I hope to do as we begin having these conversations more, we receive these allotments in those specific categories. Without legislation, we don't have the flexibility to shift them around. So we do have flexibility as a result of House Bill 1105, where we can utilize those transportation dollars to actually be able to shift them to our child nutrition, in support of these meals and delivering meals to these families in need. We've been given that flexibility from that category, so we will be shifting those dollars for the salaries of the staff that we have that are working our internet hub locations, for the staff that, and these are primarily our operations staff, i.e. our bus drivers and our bus monitors, who are the ones who are running the temperature checking stations at each of our schools, where they are there, checking staff's temperatures as they come in, logging those staff in so that records can, in the event that contact tracing had to occur. They are also assisting with some cleaning in those facilities, as well as signage and posting of those types of things. And with this bill, now we will shift those dollars that were budgeted and allocated for these drivers to drive a bus. We have the flexibility now to shift them now that we have them employed in other duties. So that is how we will be utilizing those funds. And to answer your question, at this time last year, we had only received 46.6 million in allotments.
So we picked up over $3 million in allotments?
Yes, we did.
Right.
A big portion of that is historically transportation. They only provide us half. Historically, they have only provided us half of the allotment at the beginning of the year and not given us the other half until the December timeframe after our, I'm drawing a blank, efficiency report is completed and submitted. However, transportation has been doing a phenomenal job, and we have an extremely high efficiency rating. So we do have an increased allotment there. And also, as a result of the legislation for our program enhancement teachers, I'm not sure if you guys recall House Bill 13, when they were looking, part of that bill with the class size restrictions, as they broke out our program enhancement teachers, and that's your art teachers, your media teachers, your foreign language, your PE, and those section allotments, we have only we're up to 75% of that allotment. So that increased for our positions. At this time last year, we were only allotted 338 positions, and we have 343 for this fiscal year.
Ms. Rath, another question about transportation. I recall that I think in February, we significantly raised salaries for some bus drivers. Was that local money for those salary raises, or does that, and I was curious, are the people who've had to shift jobs, are they still getting that raise that we approved in the spring?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that question. The staff that are working are getting paid their same hourly rate to do these other duties that they would be if they drove a transportation vehicle for us. We do maximize the state dollars as much as we can. There is a cap or a maximum for our hourly bus driver rate. So some of that was local impact for that raise. And we did have budget and do have budget to support that on the local side for our drivers, but we will maximize our state resources as much as we can up to the maximum that the state allows us to charge.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So just on a run rate basis, that last year at this time, we were over 20, by the end of the first quarter, we had spent over 20% of our funds. And this year we're at about 17 or 18% of our funds. So our run rate is, we're not quite spending money as quickly as we did. So we're kind of ahead of the game. So just pointing that out.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. And, you know, those are the types of things to look at and think about, especially, you know, what I'm thinking about. We are a little ahead right now. And particularly transportation is the big area that we are ahead. However, keeping, you know, in the back of our mind that when we do open in Plan B and we are operating in a hybrid schedule, our transportation costs are more than likely going to be exponentially higher than they typically were, or their run rate is going to be higher than when we were in Plan A.
Right, and won't take it up yet, but as a budgeting exercise, will we be able to project those costs to come up with an estimate of what it looks like under a hybrid scenario? Because that's kind of part of the question, I think. There's some people that think you can't operate under the hybrid schedule because it's just too expensive. Anyway, but I'll hold that for later. But yes, you're absolutely right.
I do think that's a great
question. It's a great point and a great question.
Yeah, I do think as we think about like what are all of the potential costs we may be looking at for the rest of this year, that seems like a really important piece. If bus drivers need to work we need twice as many hours from bus drivers and X amount of extra from, and I assume the state transportation dollars aren't going to make up for that. So we're going to need to find the money from other sources.
That is correct. That's a concern of a lot of finance officers across the state, is what she pointed out, is that the hybrid models they're costly because of the safety of our students, and socially distancing them on a bus is going to make it where we can't transport as many students as we are accustomed to transporting, and then it's going to mean more routes. So, you know, you're going to have to run more routes. We don't have any more buses. We are not going to get any more buses. We're not have the funds to buy any more yellow buses. And so as a result, working within those current yellow buses that we have, and then those current drivers, and establishing the key component is the routes, and establishing those routes to pick up those students to get them to school on time and home on time.
One thing that's striking me as we're talking about this is, you know, there are some districts right now that are in B. And so this must be a piece that they're doing right now, right? So, and obviously like the geographies of all these different counties and school districts are so different, but, you know, a month or two from now, we might have a pretty decent sense of how much it's costing them to do it and how they're doing it most efficiently and cheapest. So I don't know if you all, I know you have your sort of networks of state school finance officers and things like that, but this seems like one where we have a real chance to learn from what they're spending right now.
And, you know, I have heard in some conversations where, you know, we are talking with those districts, you know, in particular from transportation lens, as well as, you know, our child nutrition lens, where we're talking with those districts who are in this hybrid model, and, you know, trying to learn from them and learn, you know, what they are doing and how this is working for them. The final thing that I want to point out here is, we had been talking about the concern, my concern about losing state funds as a result of our ADM and it being down over our projected. One thing that House Bill 1105 did not protect us from is charter school enrollment. So if the numbers that we are down by, if those students enrolled in charter schools and those charter school enrollments have reflected a significant increase, we will be adjusted for those ADM at a later time. As we have reached out to our charter schools, particularly the ones that are in our county, to try to get a pulse on what their Orange County school student count is. And we've yet to get that information from any of them. So unfortunately, I don't have a pulse on how many of these students are just, the parents are just, homeschooling them, or if they've actually been enrolled in another charter school. Based upon the conversations with the principals, we're not getting input that the students that are not showing up in their enrollment have actually withdrawn to move to a charter school.
So Rhonda, the only one, because I know both of our charter schools are full, but there's a new charter school in Alamance County. It's a K-3 school. Are you following that one?
Yes, ma'am, I am. And from my understanding, I did not think Eno was at capacity. Eno River.
Oh, I thought it was full. I thought it was full. Okay.
I need to get some information and do some investigation on that. So thanks for sharing that. I did not think that school was at capacity. I know the Expedition is at capacity. I was under the understanding that Eno River still had capacity in high school.
Okay. So are we concerned? I don't know what the enrollment numbers look like, but are we concerned about this? Do you have a number in mind that you're concerned about on the enrollment?
At this point in time, I am not. Since House Bill 1105 passed, I was concerned about the ADM reduction, because when I looked at our day 10 numbers, we were in jeopardy of having roughly 6.5 state positions reverted had they not passed this legislation. So as a result of the legislation, I'm not concerned this fiscal year in regards to that. However, I will continually bring it up and talk about as we begin looking towards fiscal year 2022 that, they may hold us harmless this year, but I'm not really confident that we will have the same pass next year.
Right. Right.
And I do think for next year also, that new charter school that Ms. Hauser mentioned in Alamance is something to keep in mind. I do think they'll draw some students away from us in the western part of the county, especially. And they were even recruiting. I had a table set up at Hog Day last year. So I'm sure they're looking to pull students from Orange County.
Yeah, they're on the parents'
They're on the border, right?
They're on the fastest growing part of our district is the Mebane part of Orange County, and that's where they're
targeting.
Yeah, and so Eflin Cheeks Elementary is probably facing the biggest risk.
I'd just say here, what I am concerned about for next year is that we're going to be facing these multiple pressures, right? Of potentially, like, if some of the lower ADM this year isn't kids just being pulled out 1 year to homeschool, but is longer term, this charter school, like greater charter school enrollment, and then also potentially like lower sales tax and lower revenues coming in to fund schools from state and local, I think we could be in a position where we are just in a really tight budget situation next year. And so that's just informing how I'm thinking about our fund balance, and some of the choices that we're making this year is sort of also wanting to be able to look further down the road for those things.
Yeah. So Sarah, just to help on that, is the sales tax funding is pretty minor compared to the others. Now, I don't know about the state part. State's funded by income taxes, so I have no idea what that's going to look like. But the county tax, the local taxes should be okay since it's primarily property taxes. And so I don't think they're
Yep.
risk at this point.
Yeah, no, it was the state funding especially that I was thinking of, and I was thinking it was mostly sales tax based, but it's not.
No, it's
Okay.
mostly income and income tax based.
Locally, but the state money is.
Local is property tax based. State money is income.
Sorry, yeah, it's okay. Yes. Right. Okay. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's helpful. You know, I just like, okay, yeah, this is a great conversation because, you know, at the end of the day, we have to like put numbers on, you know, move them from, I'm worried about this to what do the numbers look like and how soft are they, right? That's really the question. And I'm with you all the way. And if you want to say what's my number one fear is another charter school. That is really scary.
And yeah, another charter school, and also part of House Bill 1105, part of that legislation was to allow for the 2 virtual charter schools to increase their enrollment.
Did they do that?
Yes, that bill allowed for them to increase their enrollment. We have not historically been significantly impacted by those virtual charter schools. That's not where our greatest ADM has been. Of course, our greatest impact are the 2 in county, and now the 3rd in county. And I just wanted to share that we too, as a cabinet, are thinking about just what you said as we begin to plan and look going forward. For example, as positions become vacant now that we don't necessarily have the ADM or the students in the seats to support adding another teacher, you know, we are looking at that and talking about holding on those vacancies, knowing that we have to look and plan not only for this fiscal year and supporting our students that we have now, but also potentially what our impact is going to be next fiscal year. Okay.
Just so you know, money on, so we haven't gotten to that part of this conversation yet.
Okay.
Me too.
So don't hold on to too much.
Yeah. Well, we unfortunately, you know, well, I don't know if that's unfortunately or fortunately, you know, we don't have we have not identified a lot of vacancies at this point in time that we will hold on. But as they become available, I just wanted to share that we too are thinking in that lane, because a lot of times you don't see the most significant impact for these type of economic downturns until that year after. So, you know, we're probably going to see our more significant impact next fiscal year. We are. And, you know, we know that and are planning for that. But all of that to say, so that wraps up the state funds and what we have been allotted to at this point in time, and what I will be recommending that we bring forward for our state budget will be the 49.2 million. Does anyone have any questions before we shift to local? would like to take a little short break? Does anybody need a break, or are we good?
What do you think, committee?
I'm okay, but Rhonda, you're the one that's doing all the heavy lifting. Do you want 5 minutes? Why don't you take 5 minutes?
Sure. I have
We'll do
that
5
it
minutes.
is, well, I have 3 different clocks and 3 different times. The one I'm looking at says, the one on the phone says 10:10. My cell
Really?
phone says 10:15. So how about this? How about we take a 5-minute break and return at 10:20? Does that work?
Sounds good.
Yes, that works.
All right. Thank you. I didn't think about it till I heard somebody in the bathroom.
Okay. Well, I think that's been 5 minutes. It went by really fast, though.
It did go by really fast, and I have 5 minutes as well. And hopefully everyone is back. I did want to, before I shift into state, if I may just take a moment to address a question that you had at the very beginning regarding, are we going to receive any more, and the gear funding. I received late last night indication that the State Board of Education did review at their last meeting the policies as well as the recommended allotments to local education agencies for some of the gear money. In particular, the two that I know of at this point in time were for mental health as well as supplemental instructional services. At this time, we are allotted to receive an additional $204,000 in support of the mental health gear funding, and this is employing or contracting specialized instructional support personnel to provide physical and mental health support services for students in response to COVID. And this is including remote and in-person services. We should be receiving that allotment. We are also it was approved by the State Board of Education, the policy and formula for the supplemental instructional services, which is to support the academic needs of our at-risk students, students in poverty, and students with disability through additional in-school instructional support. And that is $77,000 until they actually release the chart of accounts where we can actually review and look in depth at what charges are permissible based upon the chart of accounts. That's all I have at this point in time, but it looks like the $77,000 is in support of in-school instructional support, and the $204,000 would be remote or in-person mental health support.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely, and I will include that in my weekly update this week as well. So I will make sure it's captured there. All right. So now let's shift to our local operating budget. I'm going to start with sharing the request that we provided to the county commissioners for our newest board members, and then we will talk about what we were actually funded. So in April, the board approved their local operating budget request, and we had requested to the county based upon needing funding based upon a student funding base of 8,156 students. This was based upon our DPI projected enrollment of 7,381, which was actually 7 down from the previous year. Our county commissioners also fund us thankfully, for our charter school students. These are students that are domiciled in Orange County and would be attending Orange County schools, but are attending charter schools. This is basically a pass-through, and of course, if we need to have more discussions about this, we can. But if the commissioners do not fund us for those charter students, that would actually come out of our per pupil spending for the actual students sitting in our schools. By state law, we are required to reimburse charter schools for the local per pupil that our local commissioners approve. We have to provide that to charter schools that have any of our students. So the commissioners fund us in arrears. They do not fund us based upon projections. They fund us based upon what our actuals were at the time frame that we submit our budget request. At the time frame we submitted our budget request last fiscal year, our number of students were 885 that were Orange County school students who were enrolled in other charter schools. We also have to factor out those out-of-district students or those non-tuition paying students. These are the students that are in our schools that are actually domiciled outside of Orange County. And this is particularly our staff. We have staff who may live in Allotments County, Durham County, Person County. They, as a benefit of working in Orange County schools, they are allowed to have their children attend our schools at no cost. So based upon looking at each of those pieces, that was our total student billing base of $8,156 to support the growth in the charter schools, as well as the small reduction in our regular ADM. We have a need of $35.5 million of revenue that is needed for continuation to support those students.
So Rhonda, just to, if I understand what you're saying, the charter students are passed through on the local funding, but we don't get the charter school funds for the state funding?
Okay, so yes, great question, and thank you for asking that. The charter schools have projected ADM just like we do from the Department of Public Instruction, and they are funded based upon that projected ADM. If there's a significant increase or decrease in their projection, then funds are taking away from the counties where those significant, I'm going to use increase because typically that's unfortunately what we've seen. That's the charter school adjustment that I told you that if you recall, that the House bill did not hold us harmless for. So the state piece of that funding, that is how the charter schools get the state side of it. DPI takes care of allotting that to those charter schools like they do the rest of us. On the local side of it, we are responsible for passing those dollars to the charter schools. It would be great. There's been discussions and, we've tried to open the door of maybe the county actually providing that funding directly to the charter schools, but that's not gotten any traction at this point in time. But, again, if you guys are interested in this, we can definitely talk more about the process. We actually require proof of residency. We actually look at every address against a power bill or a rental agreement to make sure that they are truly an Orange County school student. And then they invoice us monthly. We do this process every month where we actually verify those students, and we only pass the funding along for those students that are truly ours.
Ms. Rath?
Yes.
Two questions. One, the charter school, the fact that the reimbursement from the county is in arrears for the charter students. What's the financial impact of that being in arrears rather than at the beginning of the school year? And then can you explain, like, in what way is an out-of-district student, like staff kids, non-tuition paying? Is it because like their tax dollars are going to the district where they live? Or is there another definition of what that means?
Sure. Okay. In regards to the financial impact of being funded in arrears, there is a financial impact. We by state law, are required to pay for every student that is in a charter school that is an Orange County school student. So for example, if when we receive our invoices from our charter school, and let's say we're 895 for the first month, and we verify our proof of residencies and verify that those are truly Orange County school students, those funds will come directly out of our local budget, which will decrease the amount of per pupil that is available to our students. Or typically, depending upon the number, we will appropriate fund balance for that. In regards to the non-tuition paying students, those students, we are not allowed to, I don't see someone on here who could get me more specifics. I may have to get back with you, Ms. Doyle, in regards to that. But from my understanding, these students they are not counted in our ADM. And so as a result, they're not counted in our state ADM. We have to submit this number to the state, and because they show up in our numbers and show up on our enrollment, the state factors them out because they're domiciled in another county and their tax dollars are actually in another county. If that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
But you said that we're doing that for our employees, right? Are there other situations other than our employees?
No.
So
Not to my knowledge, unless tuition is waived. I believe that may come into play there.
So if I put all this together, and if I took your totals, operating budget, local and state and federal, and our total enrollment, I'll use the big number. It's, tell me if what is our total per pupil spending? Looks like it's over $11,000 per pupil. Does that sound right?
Yes, ma'am.
So, and I just need to put that on the table because, Sarah did this great analysis of the performance of our students, and our students perform at the bottom 10% in the state from a growth and academic perspective, but our per pupil spending is at the top 10%, might be higher than that. So have we ever looked at, because I think like Chatham, Allotments, I know Chapel Hill's well over 12,000, but Chatham, Allotments, they're all in the 9,000. Wake is a much bigger district, but even these small districts that are our size, they're much lower. And have we ever looked at that as to why we're so different?
Just one thing to add there, when I did that analysis about like test results, I also looked at the spending and all in state, local, federal, it looked like we were something like 18th in the state. So that might be top 20%, because some districts get a lot more federal funding than we do. So we're still one of the highest, yeah.
I think whatever, but
I think your point stands though, that it's, we do have much higher funding than most, if we're in the top 10% or top 20%, we're still among the most best funded.
Yeah, I'd love to know what they're doing that we're not, and what we're doing that they're not. What is creating this imbalance? And that's maybe a longer term priority question, but it's something that we have to really talk about at some point.
Thank you. Also, as part of our request to the commissioners was also any of those state mandates that we were anticipating at the time that we prepared the budget. And please keep in context that this at this time was all pre-COVID when we were looking at this. Part of our request also included state mandated salary and benefit increases. At the time that this budget was being developed, which was pre-COVID, in the pre-COVID stages, there was talk and momentum and movement. There would be certified staff increases as well as classified staff increases. We had budgeted and projected 5% for our certified and 3% for our classified staff. And also we knew from the biennium budget that we would have benefit increases, and that would be the health insurance premium that we pay for each of our employees, as well as the retirement benefit that we also have to contribute for each of our employees. That generated an additional $984,000 that we were anticipating that we requested from the commissioners as a result. So for our continuation budget request, we requested $36.5 million, which based upon the ADM of 8156 equated to a per pupil of $4,500. This was roughly a $147 increase over the previous years per pupil. So that is what we requested. So this is what we were actually funded. As the budget discussions developed, as COVID happened, as we saw the results of COVID, the results of schools, businesses, et cetera, being closed and shut down for a temporary time. And also the impact of taxes as well as sales taxes in the counties. Our commissioners, based upon our fund balances that were being held in Chapel Hill, Carrboro, as well as Orange County schools, did not fund us for our total budget request. They actually funded us at $4,367 per pupil, which was only a $15 increase over the previous year, which equated to roughly $35.6 million. So based upon our requests and what we actually received, we had a shortfall of $863,750. So now I'd like to take some time sharing with you how we looked at the shortfall from our request and what we were actually funded, and how we are addressing the shortfall, and then what it's going to take for us to be able to balance our budget as a result. If you recall, our budget request included state salary increases of 5% and 3%, and that we saw as things began to materialize that those increases were not going to be mandated and were very unlikely that they were going to occur in this fiscal year as a result of COVID. So as a result, our request was overstated approximately $590,000 that we would not need because of these salary increases being very unlikely. In the event, let's say that legislators did decide to give a pay increase to these staff, that would have to be borne by the local budget because we did not receive funding for that. We did receive, when I look at what we need for what has already been approved, which is a step increase for our teachers, if applicable. There's $1,000 annual increase if in certain steps on the salary scale, that if a teacher moves from one step to another, the legislators did approve that they would be eligible and earn that increase associated with that. And also the one-time $350 bonus that has been approved for teachers and instructional support. The anticipated need associated with that is $117,000. In regards on the benefit side,
I'm
our
sorry.
health-
Rhonda, can you guys go back to that a second? Here's the part that I'll never understand. So the bonus, the $350, didn't the state give us that money?
They gave us that money for those 343 positions, but the difference between our positions and what they gave us or they didn't give us. Does that?
Thank you.
And that's actually the same concept, isn't it? With the benefits increases and things like that too. Like the state covers the state teachers, we have to cover the locally funded teachers or staff. Or
Yes.
is it accurate?
Yes, great point. As if you recall a previous few slides before, when we looked at the positions that we were funded, and they will provide the funding for those positions. But those ones that are local and federal, because federal is not position funded. And for example, EC, all of those teachers that are being paid out of those EC funds, they may give a little bit of an increase to support those teachers, but they do not give enough money to offset the increases as a result of their salaries and their benefits, because it's in a dollar allotment. Does that make sense?
Huge light bulb. Thank you.
Great, like that. Okay, so moving on to the benefits piece of it, the hospitalization at the time that we prepared the budget was projected to roughly increase to the tune of $250 or $300 per participant annually. That did not materialize. It actually only increased $20. However, our retirement was 0.2% higher than what was being projected. So as a result of those additional funds for our local piece of it that were not funded by the commissioners are needed to the tune of $156,500. So bringing that all together, we had a shortfall in our request versus what was actually funded of $863,750. We're going to need $273,500. So as a result of that, a fund balance, we will be bringing forward as part of our budget request, a fund balance appropriation of $273,500 to balance our budget for the salary increases for the step, the one-time bonus, as well as the benefit increases for our local positions.
So, Ms. Rath, those are things we would approve now, like from the outset, rather than seeing like how it actually all ends up costing over the course of the year, right? We would just plug that now. Am I understanding?
Yes. That right? Yes, ma'am. We would bring as part of the final budget approval, and you'll see this again as we go further into this presentation to talk about fund balance. You will see this 273. I just wanted to take some time to kind of build the story of where that is coming from. And that will be part of our budget that we would present now, where we would go ahead and appropriate that fund balance to balance the budget.
And then just to make sure, so let's say we're looking at next year's budget, we would build that. This was mostly for those salary increases and benefits increases. And so we would request from the commissioners, our request would increase by what these actually ended up being, 273. If there's any additional anticipated increase for next year, that would be sort of added on.
Yes, ma'am. This will become our continuation budget, our base continuation budget as part of our request for the next fiscal year. We'll incorporate that increase.
Okay. And then if they didn't fund that,
the salary. Now, and if they didn't fund it, we would be in the same scenario. Okay. Either we would have to reduce our budget or we would have to utilize fund balance.
Right.
So I want to then go back to that. I have two thoughts on this. One is there are other unbudgeted items that we'll talk about, like learning labs and technology and other things that might also go into the fund balance. Then there's these 10 or so positions that are unfilled. And how does that hit the budget? So this is based on a budgeted number of positions, not on an actual number of positions.
That is correct. So what would happen, we would appropriate the fund balance based upon our continuation budget as of this point in time, which would be continuation from the previous year and staffings at that level. If those salaries continue to lapse and we are able to recoup those funds, they would go back into fund balance at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay.
Okay. So breaking down our local operating budget by funding source a little more granular here shows each of the pieces of our revenues that we receive for our local budget. We have the county appropriation, which is based upon the $4,367 per pupil. We also have fines and forfeitures, which are what are collected for the county as a whole. Our budgeted estimated anticipated revenues from that are $185,000. That's right in line with what they have typically been. We get a percentage. This is split between us and Chapel Hill Carborough City Schools as well. So that's the 40% of what is collected for the county. And then the rest of our revenue is based upon fund balance. And we've already approved a fund balance appropriation for the elementary family liaisons, for the technology, for the flat panel TVs, for the synchronous and asynchronous learning in the classrooms, as well as the Adm virtual curriculum. So to date, we have already approved $870,000 of fund balance appropriation. The remaining items represent those items. The next four are fund balance appropriations from previous fiscal years that are continuing to be restricted for those purposes and unspent. There was a $250,000 fund balance appropriation last fiscal year for district furniture upgrades to have us in compliance with DPI for the furniture in the district. There's some fund balance that was appropriated for student reassignment that remains. We had $500,000 fund balance to upfit the Welcome Center. There remains $138,000 roughly of that. And then you will see here the fund balance needed to balance the local budget of $273,500, which would be a ask that we would be asking for the board to appropriate and approve.
And Ms. Rath, the school safety carryover, is that for what is the school safety carryover for?
That was a result of the Safe Havens study that was done several years ago. And I do know that, those funds will be being depleted with those vestibules. They will be used to offset what we may be lacking in capital funds.
Okay. Okay, great, thanks.
Okay. So, much like the state, I wanted to give you a picture of our local budget for first quarter of this year in comparison to first quarter of last year. As you can see, our total budget for this fiscal year is $37.7 million. To date, we have spent $6.5 million, of course, projecting September's based upon our expenditures to date. Last year, our total local budget was $37.5 million, and to this point, we had spent $6.6 million. in the kick out box to the side there, just pointing out some of these knowns that we know of right now, which I will go into a little bit more detail on the next slide, is the increased need for hotspots, so that students and families can have access. Professional development for our staff, for the technology, for the flat panels, the Miracast technology for the synchronous and asynchronous learning, the professional development to use that with fidelity, as well as professional development for our K-2 population who are new this year to using devices. And then there's been some discussion about the workbooks, Bridges workbooks for some of our students in our elementary age population.
So, and maybe I should hold this. I don't see anything here for increased support for all this, technology. We've talked about in the board meeting, technology is now the backbone of our operations. And so is there an increase in budget for technical support for this technology?
Yes, thank you again for setting me up for my next slide, because yes, you're doing great. To increase that budget, we're going to need to ask for a fund balance appropriation. And that is what we have here for our fund balance, taking a look at it to what we know at this point in time. So I'm going to start with our beginning audited fund balance was $4.7 million. Our unaudited underrun for this last fiscal year, which the auditors are currently looking at right now, looks like we underran our budget to the tune of $1,150,000 approximately, that will be added back to our fund balance, giving us an ending fund balance of $5.8 million. Now, if we take into account the fund balance that has already been appropriated for the items on the previous screen, that previous two slides that we talked about, that is the first three items that you will see here. The $739,000 is carryover that's already been appropriated, primarily the school security as a result of the safe havens. The appropriations that have already been approved by the board to date are $870,000. We need $273,500 to balance our budget, and we will also be requesting an additional fund balance appropriation at this time from the board for operational technology needs. That is for additional 500 additional hotspots, as well as the professional development for the Miracast technology for the flat panels that are in each of the classrooms. There's also docking stations that were not included in the device refresh for all of the staff laptops, and we are learning and seeing that docking stations are going to be needed in this environment for all of those. We were able to purchase 400. There's a need for 600 more. That's roughly another 125,000, as well as the hotspots would be 150,000 to purchase 500 more. And again, that does include the device as well as the service. 150,000 includes those both.
You sure?
And, yes, we looked at the devices are $149.99 for 500 of them. That's $75,000.
Right.
$15 a month for the service is another $75,000. So 150,000 of that 300 is in support of those additional 500 hotspots.
Okay. I have a, do the hotspot purchases come out of capital or operating, do you know?
They would not come out of capital. They would come out of operating.
It's all operating. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And so the professional development for the Miracast, is that working out to $25,000? Is that what I'm seeing?
Yes, and that is based upon we've identified 18 staff that we would pay stipends for them to work with this software and learn this software and develop how to use guides and video tutorials to then deploy to the staff. Train the trainer model is more what we're thinking of in regards to that, as well as other hardware and software for video programming. Is in that $25,000 that may be needed in support of creating these how-to tutorial guides and the supplies for that. The biggest portion of that fund balance, of that additional $25,000 fund balance, are stipends for 18 staff to be trained to spend the time outside of their normal workday training for this technology, and then developing the how-to video guides, as well as printed materials, and training our teachers to utilize it.
So this might be a question more for Dr. Gammon, or I'm not sure quite who, but are there not how-to guides for how to use this technology in existence out there? It seems like I'm struggling a little bit with this idea of like paying people extra stipends for a bunch of things where this seems like a place potentially where is there some money to be saved there? I guess is how I'll put it.
So this is Kathleen. So we did set that aside because what we've been hearing from teachers is that they really need the time and appropriate professional development to make sure that they know and that they feel confident in implementing technology and the supports that we've provided. And so we wanted to make sure that, and Ms. Rath, you can correct me, but I think some of the stipend was also for our teachers to have training outside of their regular workday, because we want to make sure that they're confident in how to live stream and what that entails. And something what we've also heard from our teachers is that it's not always a tutorial, a video tutorial that they want. They want to be able to, meet with our team, be able to go through the training, even if it's in a virtual scenario, and hopefully as we transition to Plan B, that these are sessions we could actually conduct in person, some of these sessions, so they could actually be in the classroom, know how to use the technology, get acclimated to what it's going to entail of the teachers to live stream while they're trying to teach and all of that. So we wanted to make sure that we were going to provide the opportunity and the support that the teachers would need and they've been asking for, to make sure that they're confident in being able to do this with fidelity.
And if I could just add that be done within the confines of a school day. And so we have to, again, build capacity, and some of that capacity will be done need to be done outside of the school day.
Okay, and so, but all teachers will need this training, right? So is the staff, are the stipends for the 18 staff, or would we be paying stipends to all teachers, or?
We would look at paying stipends for, like Mr. Graff said, train the trainer model. So we would get teacher experts from the school building that would get the full training that they then could take to their school. So maybe on a Friday, that's a training that they're providing, or during a PLC time, that's a training that they're providing. What we've heard from our teachers is that they like that more intimate setting where they have the relationship with their peers, to learn from their peers in that way. So we would be training teachers from each school that would go, and then also then help to spread that training throughout to make sure that every teacher did receive it.
So would they also be serving as sort of a technical support as teachers were starting to use this technology?
We would not expect them to be the tech support, and that's why we're having our DLCs and our IT staff make sure that they're fully trained. Because while teachers are great at helping each other, and we really appreciate doing that, we don't want to fall on these people during the school day when they're also trying to teach, to have to provide that. So we're not expecting them to be tech support. We're just asking them to become experts so that they can help train their peers on how to use the Miracast technology in the flat, especially for live streaming.
Okay, so that's great. So the DLCs though would not be the ones doing the train the trainer program. That would be teachers doing that.
Well, right now, actually, the DLCs are working on developing training for our teachers. So they would be the ones that would, take the time to become initial experts, and then they would also help train our teachers, train the trainers. So teaching our teachers who have been identified to help train the rest of their school staff.
Okay, so who would be receiving the stipends? The $25,000 would be spent on?
It would mainly be, I would say, for the teachers who are getting the training and doing this PD outside of the regular school day. But that may include DLCs, because they also would be then providing the training outside of the school day. And then if our IT teams, if that's required, then that would still include them as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Dawson, you were breaking up there right at the end. Could you say that last bit again?
That if it requires our IT team to be working outside of their work hours to provide training or to receive training, that may also include them as well.
Okay. Okay, we can move on. I know we have lots to talk about. I'll say I have questions about whether there's a way we could do the same thing for free or less money as a place to save money. So,
and I think
we should move on.
Yep, and just to say real quick, Ms. Smiley, that even if we did set aside money for that, of course, and if we're not using it for that, I'm sure that there will be enough tech issues and needs that that money would go for supporting technology needs for our students and staff.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure we'll have lots. Yeah.
And if I could go back on this, with $3.7 million in an unassigned fund balance, what I'm seeing is our fund balance is actually has been growing every quarter, surprised by a lot. And last time was it around 4? Is that where it was? So somehow we've covered a lot of additional costs, and we still have a pretty healthy fund balance. So it looks like the staff is doing an amazing job to me. I think there's a different story that's getting lost in all of the accounting, but I think the fund balance is. Rhonda, maybe you can tell me how's the fund balance doing, or is that your next slide?
Well, my next slide is not that, but you did point out what I really wanted to make sure that I left you guys with is an unaudited estimate of what our unassigned fund balance will be at this point in time of $3.7 million. That fund balance has grown from this time last year. Our unassigned was more around, it was roughly about $1.25 million short, less than that. And that's a lot due to the savings that we saw as a result of the closure in the school district from the March timeframe to the end of the school year. We saw, savings, a lot of savings in our transportation area associated with not running those buses. That allowed us to shift more local dollars to state to utilize those resources. We also saw savings in workshops and conference attendances, travel, substitute teachers. We saw a substantial savings there as well, and that all materialized to roughly, well, it did materialize to my estimate of the $1.1 million that we will be putting back in fund balance to get us to an unassigned of $3.7 million. So I think the important thing that I want everyone to be aware of here is the $3.7 million is what we have to work with going forward when we need to find money to address these unknowns. There are some things that we are brainstorming and already looking at and working on costing that will be potential fund balance appropriations should the board approve and elect to do that. For example, we've looked at the outside structures for our students whenever we do transition to Plan B to be able to get outside safely and social distance. The internet hubs, we envision that those will need to continue being run and mandated even when we do transition into a hybrid model. Right now, those are primarily staffed by our bus drivers. When we move into a hybrid, we're going to have to utilize that staff to transport our students. And so there may be a need for us to have to hire staff to actually support that initiative. One other thing that we've talked about is the lost revenues for our athletic programs at our schools. A lot of those revenues from ticket sales as well as concession stand sales were utilized to help maintain equipment for those programs. And those equipment repairs and needs are still there without those revenues to offset that. And as a result, we may have some additional expenditures to assist schools with that. As we're looking at more customization of the Adm courses and the blueprints for our courses, there may be stipends associated with that. The devices for our kindergartners that were not included in the device refresh. Those are just a few of the things that we have talked about and identified that are unknowns at this point in time. And unfortunately, as we have seen in this short period of time, there seem to be more evolving on a daily basis. But I think what I want everyone to just walk away with is that the 3.7 million is what we have to work with as we are beginning to look at these other needs and other priorities going forward in this environment. I would like now to shift to the enterprise funds, if I may, if there's no other questions here.
Maybe we could stay here. Oh, go right ahead.
I have a comment and then a question. In terms of all this, and honestly, I have an incredible appreciation of all the fund accounting and different places where all the money comes, but from a budgeting and a board perspective, it is really difficult to look at things through this lens. And I realize that it's your problem, Rhonda, not ours, to keep track of all this stuff. But it to me, when I look at COVID, for example, And if I look at just by itself, the technology impacts from COVID, meaning the online curriculum, the virtual learning curriculum, the training for our staff, the computers, the hotspots, in and of itself is a mega $1 million impact to this district. But through this presentation, it's kind of lost in all the fund accounting, and you've covered it, but we've not kind of given the full picture, and it makes it difficult, and only because I think there's a story we may need to tell the county commissioners when we meet with them about, this is something that we've been forced to respond to, and it's affected, and this is how much was budgeted, and this is how much we got through the COVID funds, and this is how much we've hit our fund balance from it. So again, if you think of it as a matrix, you have a line item of, and I would split out the technologies and the different funds that it comes from. It would be really helpful, I think, and I don't know what the other board members think about being able to see these big line items that way of what the funding sources are for them.
Yeah, I agree with that in the sense that I think would be really helpful, this idea of a broader story to tell, and what are, I don't know whether it's, what do our students need? What have we had to spend? Well, they need like access. They need to be able to learn online, right? And then, so what are the different things that we've spent money on in order to do that? They need access to high quality curriculum. And so that also works online. And so what are we doing? Something about the things we're trying to achieve. And then what are some of the expenditures that we've had to, and what are some of the other anticipated expenditures that we're going to have to figure out from fund balance or somewhere. There's something about those big buckets that I think I would find helpful around outcomes. Bonnie, I don't know if that sort of syncs up with what you were saying, or you were thinking different.
Yeah, pretty much, but I would like it in one table, that said by line, this is virtual, online curriculum or what. I don't, that's too small. But the technology impacts of COVID, and the rows would be all the different line items, and the columns would be all the different funding sources that we're drawing on to pay for them. And then there might be some unfunded needs left at the end. But so I'm looking for the answer in a table that, because I'm lost, and it's hard to lose me in numbers, but I'm like, my head's spinning on this,
Right. So if I may just chime in, I appreciate that feedback, and I'm sure I speak for Rhonda when I say it's very helpful. And I think the point of this particular part of this budget presentation is just to speak to the many unknowns, right? And so for example, with regards to when we think about shifting to Plan B and looking for opportunities for students to have, say, a math break or be able to go outside and have lunch. And so we have to consider, well, what might that look like? What's already available at schools to allow for that? What might we need to add? So we, are costing out the cost for tents or for gazebos or pavilions. And so some of those things we can get a price for and be able to share that. But again, it's still sort of an unknown because we don't know, or we do know from the conversation with the person's title's going to escape me, but who would approve a tent in school said that's not something they'd recommend because of the hurricane season. So I just think the point of this slide is just to say that there are so many unknowns that we don't know their impact yet. And so while there are knowns, and there are just as many unknowns, and that's what the point of this particular slide was intended to show.
Mm-hmm. And it might be that as we're further crystallizing, like as those, we're trying to get more unknowns become knowns, it might be helpful to sort of group these things according to like costs of like continuing to run Plan C and like refine that, costs of running a hybrid model I assume all of these things are more expensive than Plan A, but right, but sort of like the if/when we move to Plan B, here are the different things we're going to need, and something along those lines, so that we're better able to see sort of just sort of mentally organize it a bit more, each of the different expenditures and sort of what they're towards, if that makes sense.
And to echo on that a little bit, Ms. Smiley, is what would be the cost of having kindergarteners and first graders back, or what would some of those subset costs look like if we weren't fully in C, if part of us remained in C, part of our student population moved to hybrid? Conversation around that, and I think that conversation will continue a little bit.
That is an interesting idea of like different scales of ramping up into a hybrid model. Like at what, I imagine like if our balance of kids who are doing fully remote versus hybrid is different, like there would be different total costs to the district. And so,
yeah, so it helps so that I agree completely, and it helps because sometimes this is an imperfect part, and so if you postulated some assumptions that said if we assume half our students stay virtual and we're bringing back K1, 2, and it's only half of them, and that I'm making this up, and a third of them need transportation, what might the costs look like? So you'd have to state some assumptions, and if the assumptions don't hold, then the model breaks. But and as in the conversation, we can talk about whether those assumptions make sense. But once you make these assumptions, here's how the numbers work. So so that's kind of it's different scenarios, and say and when you look at different scenarios, then you start to see what the risk looks like, where the financial risk is. So that's kind of, I think, what we're all saying in different ways that we'd like to understand a little bit. It's not perfect. We don't know. It is a big unknown. So how do you model it in a way to?
I am wondering, not to get too nitpicky, but I am wondering with transportation costs, how much is it is the lack of efficiency, when because we're such a spread out county, kids going back, are you saving money because you're only driving a smaller portion of kids, or are you not saving money because they're so spread out? And I'm sure at some point, surveying parents, I'm imagining some parents aren't going to want their kids on the bus, especially if those parents are now working from home and able to drive them, so I'm curious what our transportation demands will be, and how what those efficiencies of those costs would be.
I'm also wondering if now might be a good time. I know Ms. Hauser had said she had a list of like potential things to spend money on. I know I have a list and some of them are here. But if we might look at our lists and see if these are things that are on your radar or not, if not, to sort of present them as something else to consider. Ms. Hauser, I don't know. And Ms. Doyle, if you have other things to add.
I guess in the, sure, that would be fine. That would be fine. Let me get that list. Because I think the supervised, if I had to, I think the supervised learning labs and the hotspots are, and technology, I don't know if it's all in here, but those are immediate things that I think technically we're committed to do, but are not fully funded. And we need to talk about that.
Would it be possible for me to very quickly share the last few bits of information? Because I think it is important to the questions the things that you're stating now.
Great. Let's do that.
Okay, I wanted to share with you where we are on our enterprise funds, beginning with our school nutrition fund. And at the beginning of this fiscal year, school nutrition had a fund balance.
Oh, Dr. Felder, you're not muted.
I'm sorry.
School nutrition had a fund balance of $515,000 roughly. As you can see, based upon last year, we ended up with a total loss in the program of $135,000 that will be applied to that fund balance. Of course, the third and fourth quarters were where we saw the most significant reduction. The fourth quarter is when we received some of those care funding and was able to apply that. The third quarter was the result of a lot of the prepackaged items that were having to be purchased as part of getting prepared for COVID. And of course, they are much more costly as a result. This fiscal year, it looks like it's
Rhonda, can you go back to that for just a second? I'm just trying to, well, it looks like we have a profit, but what you're saying is we had an early loss, but over time, we've caught up. I can't tell if this is a funding problem or a cash flow problem, because I think you have a combination of both.
It is a combination. It's primarily cash flow. Cash flow is the impact in that first quarter. But the third quarter and fourth quarter losses are direct association with COVID.
Okay. Thanks.
What time period is the third quarter? I guess I would have thought we were done with the third quarter by the time COVID hit.
No, ma'am, that would be April, May, and June. Oh, sorry. COVID would, third quarter would be January, February, and March.
Okay, so the March was we were closing and we were getting all of these supplies. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes. As you can see, for the first quarter of this year, estimating the reimbursements that we have received, as well as the staffing and the food, we are pretty close to, well, we have a profit right now, and pretty close to breaking even to make sure that the program is sustained. And this is under the summer feeding program, which I think is, important and needs to be just remembered, that we are in this status because the summer feeding program was extended through the end of June, and therefore, as a result, we're able to provide meals to anyone who shows up. And we're also able to provide meals for Saturday and Sunday, which also is not allowable under the National Feeding Program, which also has helped keep our reimbursements up for this first quarter.
So in the last board meeting, we were worried about the free and reduced lunch forms, and then the federal funding changed. So based on this going forward, we're not worried about this at all. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. Based upon the status that we're in right now, that is correct. And that is because of the extension of the summer feeding program that the USDA and the government just implemented for us, as well as the flexibility in the transportation funds.
Okay, now in a normal school year, we would feed about 7,000 kids, but we're feeding much less through this program. So what happened to the people? Are we keeping our staffing at the same levels, or?
Right now, our staffing is at the same levels. Over the summer months, of course, not this summer, historically over the summer months for the summer feeding program, the staff is reduced, but we are maintaining our staffing, and there's been a lot of work done to maximize our commodities to keep our food costs and our supply costs down so that we can maximize those reimbursements.
So even with the full staff, we're whole financially through the fund, or are we funding it through other?
We're whole right now. There are some funds that we will utilize if need to be from those CARES funds, but based upon where we are for the first quarter, that's not a concern for the first and second quarter.
Okay, right.
The next is our Community Schools Relations Fund, which was our after-school program. As you can see, for last year, the program basically broke even with a profit of $15,000. They had a fund balance at the beginning of this fiscal year of $568,000. And I think what I wanted to share here is going forward. There are still costs that are being realized for this program, primarily personnel costs. And we are utilizing the fund balance and offsetting those salaries with that fund balance. Now, those salaries will not hold at that level because staff are retiring as a result of the status of the economy, the status of the program, and just where we are right now. Those staff have the years of service and they have elected to retire. But I think what I wanted to drive home is that there is a fund balance available, and also to recommend maybe we consider using the fund balance as we start looking at our supervised learning labs and what is needed to maintain those going forward. Phase 1 is up and started. It's at the Welcome Center being run by the YMCA. There's currently 24 students enrolled. And that is no cost to Orange County Schools. Phase 2 is the phase that is slotted to begin next Monday, the 14th, at Pleasant Green United Methodist Church. We have 9 McKinney-Vento and ESSA students that have committed to attend. This will be at no cost to those families, and we will also be providing the transportation for those 9 students. So if you look at the Pleasant Green facility as a learning lab, a supervised learning lab location, the weekly cost for the 9 students that have committed to attend there as of right now is $6,020. To keep that lab open for the 9-week period that we've committed to, it will cost the district $54,180. The maximum exposure that can be anticipated with a student supervised learning lab with a student capacity of 20 students is $8,020 a week, or $72,180 for a 9-week period. So what I had hoped to be able to share here is, as we look at other moving into and transitioning to phase 3, the worst case scenario of what the cost could be for the district. So for example, if all 51 of the McKinney-Vento and ESSA students committed to attend, we would need 3 facilities for those students. So those 3 facilities would be, for those 9-week periods, would be $72,180 times 3.
And what's our sense of, I see we have 9 students so far. Have the other families declined? Have we not been able to be in contact with them? What are the chances of, of filling up the Pleasant Green facility and needing additional, particularly for these students that we're subsidizing? I don't know if there's anybody on the line who has that kind of information.
I was wondering if there was a team member on the line who could answer that.
Good morning.
Morning.
Also, Sharita's on the call as well, and so she could help. But we're currently working with Sharita Cobb and the school social workers because of the confidentiality with regards to the students that we're reaching out to. So the school social workers are taking care of that because they already have a relationship with them. And there are some, I know some individual, well, we've basically gone through every case individually, but there are some where the transportation has been an issue. Even though we're offering it, that they need it to be earlier or later. And it's just something we can't address because we don't want buses and students on the road when it's dark. But we're also reaching out to families slowly. So I don't know, Ms. Cobb, if you had anything to add to that.
Good morning. Yes, the families that we've reached out to thus far, out of all that we've reached out to, the 9 that were mentioned are the ones that have said, yes, this works for my work schedule. I would love to have this, but we do have some free and reduced waiting in the wings that we feel like would be are eager to take advantage of this opportunity as well. But as far as our ESSA and McKinney-Vento students at this time, those are the 9 that this will meet their schedule for, because some of the parents work a later schedule, and so the bus pickup and drop off would not work for their schedules.
So this like just raises a host of questions for me. Why wouldn't we take the community relations people and move them into these facilities to staff the facilities? That's one. The second is, I thought we weren't going to provide transportation, so I wondered why we were doing that. And then the third, which is more of a funding question, is, what I'm hearing is people are saying $200 a week is just too expensive. So if, rather than, I guess my question is, how many of our students, if we asked our elementary schools to say, how many of your children need childcare, what would that answer be? Do we have that? Do we know what that is?
So, Ms. Hauser, I hope I with your questions. Yes.
Start with the last one first.
That's what I'm going to do. So yes, we did reach out to all of our families a few weeks ago and shared a form where they could provide information. I will get an update on that and share that at the board meeting. The last time I looked at it, we had about 50 families that had responded, meaning that they were interested in knowing more about other opportunities. We continue to update our website and share opportunities throughout Orange County, not just the YMCA, but other opportunities for families. With regards to transportation, that was on the last board meeting, but it wasn't addressed in the recommendation made by the board, whether that would be included or not. And so when the school social workers reached out to those families, transportation by and far, if it's not provided, they're not coming. Because of the nature of the, if you're homeless, having transportation is not as likely. And I think they're all requesting transportation if they come. So we've worked with the transportation department and are able to utilize one bus to transport those 9 students, and that cost is included. You asked another question and I don't remember.
I wondered why we can't redeploy staff from our community relations, because our after-school programs to do this.
Yeah. So my understanding is are employed as TAs, and so they are being leveraged in this, in school-based positions in that way, and so we wouldn't be able to tap them for this role.
So the numbers here. So this is about $400 a pupil, right? That's what this is. Because last time it was $200 a student. Now it's $400 a student, and I don't, and my experience, and this is just my anecdotal survey, says that $200, the answer is no, and $100, the answer is yes, that parents are more interested because cost is a factor. So I don't know how we get to what's the need, what's the sensitivity to cost, and then can we deliver it? So I'm a little, I feel like we're working at this from by isolating a couple of high need populations, but that our need in the district is broader. Now, I could be completely wrong, and if there's not, then we should figure out a way to send these kids into the welcome center at the Y and stop worrying about it. I mean, I just don't know what to, I thought we had a 300 pupil problem, not a 20 pupil problem. So I'm not sure.
No, your point's well taken. And we started with this small group of 51 students, being able to determine that we felt that these were our most neediest families of the supervision resources, access to educational internet, and just supervision. We also, and so first it's just, are those 51 interested? And seeing and determining if they're interested and if what we're providing meets their needs. And there are some concerns about COVID, so that they're fine where they are and would rather not come out. The next level would be our students in elementary schools that received free and reduced lunch last year, because we don't fully have that data this year. And that group is a little over 700. And so that would be the next question for the board, because if you open that up, that's not at maximum 3 sites. That could be at maximum more sites than we can accommodate. And how do you distinguish, is it first come, first serve? And so that just, the pool gets so much larger, and we're starting small, and seeking your guidance on how to move forward.
Well, my assumption is not that everybody wants it, because a lot of kids are home with their parents, and they've got these micropods that have formed in community. There's lots of other things happening in community that are serving our kids, which is why, the question to the schools is, how many of your kids need childcare at $50? If it's free and reduced, we've, I think, already agreed that it would be $50 a week. And if it's not, I'm making up the numbers, or $100 a week. But it's just, how many do we need? Because I don't want to presume based on the old world what they need. It's based on your circumstances today, which are not predictable by us. Who needs childcare, and how many people do we need to serve? Because then it looks different. That's I'm going to stop. I don't know how else to. I don't know how to solve a problem until I have sized it, and I don't think we have sized the problem, and so that concerns me. And maybe we should just ignore it. I don't know.
No, I mean, I agree with you that I think we need to understand how many students need access to a learning lab, and their parents would send them. The one other thing that I would add here in terms of like what I think we would need to evaluate this is, these are the 9-week costs, right? But what if we're out for a semester and we're actually needing to dedicate these spaces for, more than 9 weeks, or God forbid, the whole school year. And I think you all referenced, I mean, even when we go back in a hybrid model, some kids are still going to need some childcare, if it's half of the week or something like that. So there's something about what are the total like long-term potential costs that I think would be helpful if there's a plan at a future board meeting to for the board to authorize, further expansion of this. I think understanding more of that total cost and understanding there's like the total potential exposure, but then to Ms. Hauser's point, how many do we really think we would end up with? That I don't know that we quite have that level of information yet from families.
And the only way I know to get it is for the schools to ask their families and for them to give us a number. I don't see a survey. I don't think a district survey will get it. I don't think forms will get it. I don't think people are going to go to our website. I think the schools would have to. The way I know that we can get any kind of reliable answer My guess is the answer is different if it's $200 a week or $100 a week or $50 a week or $400 a week, which is what this looks like.
Can I
And
just
I think the
say,
answer, I'm sorry, and I think the answer, to your point, Ms. Hauser, which is a good one, I think the answer varies. There are lots of variables that could impact a response. As Ms. Stowe just shared, for some families, they were interested, but the time frame doesn't work for them. And so, you know, those are some of the variables that, again, I believe would impact a response to that.
That's fine. So in the time frame of the 8 to 3 or the 8 to 6 time frame, is that what you mean? When you say the time
Yes,
frame
the
doesn't
time
work?
frame of the supervised learning lab. Yeah.
Yeah, so at some point you say, this is what we can do, and if it doesn't work, we're sorry. You know, here's some other resources in community, right? I mean, that's we're not magicians, you know. You guys are working really
No,
hard.
absolutely. That we're not. Right.
I think what we'd end up with is, you know, we think 250 families or students would probably use this, and then the actual number who would end up enrolling might, you know, and the board might say, well, we think we can only afford, or you all might say, we think we can only afford, you know, to set up these for 150 slots, right? And so it will be first come, first serve, and then we'll set up the 150. We thought 250 might be interested, but actually, like, when push comes to shove, only 175 students are trying to enroll. Yeah, you know, we can't get perfection, but I think the number who express interest would be higher than the number who actually end up showing up. And in any case, we sort of need to decide how many spots do we think of our healthy but fund balance, but that is required for many things. You know, how much of that do we want to expend, or school community relations fund balance do we want to spend on this?
And we're also learning a lot from the YMCA's or phase one, because they actually, at the last time I checked, which was early last week, they only had 5 students paying full price. They had a number of students scholarshiped in, so they pay a certain amount based on a sliding scale that they set. And then they had a donor step up to provide free space for the rest of the school year, as long as this lasts, for our New Hope and Eflin Cheek students, because that's where they had a site. They haven't been able to fill all of those. So,
Wow.
and they have openings at 197. So we're learning. Now, they don't offer transportation. That is one thing they don't offer, but we're still learning. They're not meeting capacity. We haven't met capacity on our first site. And so we're just trying to gauge the need in some ways, you know, through those lens. And then also what Ms. Rath is sharing today is, and one of our concerns too, is we've offered this, you know, for 9 weeks. If this lasts longer, and it will, even when we go to Plan B, because every other week students are home. On Fridays, students are home. At what point are you, as a school district, committed to serving the 9 students or the potentially 51 students in this first phase that sign up, and for how long? And we're trying to determine what that looks like, or we figure out what's the next phase. And I'll be quiet after this, just remind you, once we can get in a school, the game changes. We're not there yet, but once we can get into a school and open up a facility, then we're able to take our DSS subsidies, which we're not right now.
Yeah, so there's 3 different pieces of this. One is need, what's the demand? The second is the cost, and the third is the funding. And as you're saying, Melanie, there's lots of funding sources that could open up. And if I have to get a little nerdy, this first semester, if you will, is actually, there's only 6 weeks left in it. So we won't be incurring the full 9 weeks cost for the, right? You know, it'll probably be 5 or 6. So it'll be half of that. You know, just to get, that's a couple. So that's, and if the place is operating at half capacity, if you only have 10 kids in it, all of a sudden the cost doubles per pupil, right? It gets really weird. So, but we need all those 3 pieces to make a decision, because if we only have 30 kids total that need it, maybe the Welcome Center is adequate and we should just funnel them into there and subsidize it. you know, and you just can't answer that until we know how many families need this.
Or do the if we have a donor to cover some kids at the Y, could we just provide the transportation if that's what the barrier is to that program? I'm mindful that we have only 15 minutes left. This has been a very rich conversation. Dr. Felder, I can see that you're talking and you're muted. Okay, you're good. Okay, great. Ms. Rath, was there more? I see we're on our last slide. Was that the voiceover?
That is all I had for this presentation.
It has been a wonderful journey. Ms. Hauser, Ms. Doyle, any other questions or we didn't get back around to the other potential costs to get on everyone's radar?
Thank you, Ms. Rath.
Let me just share a concern. We are going to go up in front of the county commissioners in a couple weeks, and presumably the board will hear something before then. They've been pretty clear that there's more money for us if we need it. But we're going to have, here's the questions I'm hearing there, and we haven't answered the question at all as to what's happening with the assessments, how far behind are our kids, what might it cost to catch them up. So that's a kind of a huge unknown for me that we've not even begun to scratch the surface on. I'd put certainly a placeholder in the budget for it. I think some of the reason I'm so interested in the technology costs, especially the hotspots, is I think the county might take some of them off our hands if we present them on their own. So I just don't know how we tell a story without bogging people down in all the different fund accounting and tell the story about here is the incremental expenses that we incurred that we did not anticipate. We're covering most of it, but here's what it looks like. And here's the things that we haven't covered, and we're nervous about it. So how do we tell that story to the county commissioners and even to our own board from a budget perspective? That's as much as I could say after 3 hours of this.
Yeah. And I really did find the deeper dive into the different sources and especially just getting more into these funds are limited and right, and we can't just switch them from pot to pot and that kind of thing. Very helpful. But I agree that I think there's if there is potential to receive more funding from the commissioners for any particular piece of this that's really in their wheelhouse right now, then being able to tell that story would be really, really helpful. On my list of potential things we might need to spend money on related to what Ms. Hauser said is potentially broader scale, high dosage tutoring, right? After school, before school, as a way to accelerate students and get them caught up. The cost of more bus routes, right? When we go back to Plan B. Before that, a question mark around bus delivery, food delivery routes, right? So I know that was sort of off the table for a while, but I do think it would help us feed more children if we did delivery routes of buses sort of similar to the bus routes. And that I imagine would cost money. Supervised learning labs. In the PPE category, wondering about, I know the state gave us some, but I imagine we might need to purchase more. And, face shields or eye protection, some of these sort of, if we're going back in person things. For our exceptional children, especially with, a lot of needs, wondering if we are doing any home visits in the meantime, and would we reimburse staff for mileage for home visits, or I don't know if I know social workers sometimes go out to houses and things like that. So are we reimbursing folks for mileage, and might we want to lean on that more heavily, especially if we stay more remote? The outdoor pavilions we talked about. Other things in the category of ventilation. So building ventilation, huge issue in making the building safe. So might we need window fans or portable air cleaning units? Do the toilets need seat covers? Apparently, when you are flushing the toilet, it is very, very helpful to keep everything in there. Do we have bathroom repairs? Yeah, I remember in the listen and learns at one of our schools, some parents describing in graphic detail the state of some of the bathrooms, right? And bathroom ventilation being a big piece. Increased cost to heating and cooling. Might we need to pay for some like specialized inspection around ventilation in order to understand the airflow and things like that? I just don't know how much of that we have relied on contractors for versus done in-house with operations. And then potentially investing more in more hands-on materials, manipulatives, workbooks, things like that for students who are remote, especially younger students, EC students. Those are some of the things that I had. Just putting those out there, no need to respond to any of those, but as some potential things we might end up incurring as costs. Ms. Doyle or Ms. Hauser, did you have anything else?
I don't at this time. I'm going to follow up back with you, Ms. Smiley, in the next day or two, so I'm not repeating questions.
Yeah. I just want to thank Rhonda for a yeoman's job. Thank you. I feel more confused than ever. Thank you. At a higher level. I'm confused at a higher level.
I did not intend that. That was definitely not my intent. So, we'll work on that. So
it's a compliment. It's a compliment.
Okay. I didn't take it as one. So, okay. My intent was definitely not to confuse you. So, my only question, Ms. Smiley, before we wrap up is the next meeting. We moved this meeting up from September. I'm sorry, I don't have my calendar in front of me. I believe it was September the
couple weeks from now.
September the 16th, actually, I believe was when this originally was scheduled, which would be next Wednesday. Is the next meeting October the 21st? Or is there another meeting that is needed before then?
Well, I guess maybe we can come back to this. I'm curious what's the best timing for the next meeting. So I think the way we approach this was sort of the third Wednesday of each month will be the meeting. And so I guess I'm wondering maybe we should more broadly consider is the third Wednesday really the best point in the month? Or is it just sort of should we move up the next one, or is that timing from your perspective? How does that fall from your perspective?
From my perspective, my crucial point at this point in time is just the final approved budget, which primarily will be us settling on our fund balance appropriations to begin this school year to begin making adjustments and planned spending going forward. In regards to
aiming on September.
September the 28th is when I'm aiming for a final approved budget for board approval.
So do we think we need any further discussion before then? I don't necessarily think so. Are we planning on discussing some next week in the board meeting as well, the budget?
Yes, ma'am. I am on the agenda to, I will be pulling from this presentation for a much shortened version for the full board.
Great.
So would that approved budget, so things like if we needed more than 500, or I don't remember how many, 500 hotspots, if we need the supervised learning labs, the filling the gaps on education, would that be in the approved budget, or would those be amendments later?
It depends of those things that can be identified as definite priorities and moving forward, they would be part of the original budget. And if not, then they would become amendments to the budget.
So I don't feel like the budget committee necessarily needs another meeting before that meeting. And so I guess I'll just, Ms. Rath, if you look at how things are going after October and you think we need to meet earlier than the 21st, let's do that. I think that makes sense.
That works for me. And as we begin to move into budget season in the December, January timeframe, is when we may need to look at adjusting. But right now, I feel like we're good.
Great. So we have 5 minutes left. Let's talk about what we anticipate some of those future budget committee meetings being about. So obviously the planning of of next year's budget. And I know typically there's also been sort of a quarterly comparison of the budget to actuals. Is that right? So we'd work both of those in.
Yes, ma'am. That usually is a report that is provided to the full board on a quarterly basis where you look at the budget versus the actuals.
So what other topics are on folks' minds that they want to talk about in this committee this year?
I have two. One is this idea of maybe it's a benchmarking process, but looking at our per pupil spending, not the non-capital, but looking at our per pupil spending and maybe benchmarking some basic categories to other districts and saying, why is ours so much higher? So I'd like to know where it's higher and why. And then the other thing, and I don't know, I see education and I don't see it as a budget. And I feel like if we are going to commit to literacy, if we're going to commit to equity, we need to invest in it. And so our budget need to be aligned to those goals. And we need to be, as we spend money, we need to say, are we aligned to what we say we're committed to?
Mm-hmm.
I have more ideas on that, but I'll just kind of.
And so what kind of conversation, just on that last one, Ms. Hauser, like what would you imagine that look like in this committee space potentially?
Well, I have I think we could talk about process for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, the numbers, our academic numbers, they're not actionable until we get them to a school level, right? Mm-hmm. So every school has a very different, growth opportunity, if you will. So we would need to go school by school and say, what resources does this school need? And what do they say? Not what we tell them, but what do they say they need to start to move the needle on growth? Because if we keep be actionable at that level, I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts. I'm sure it'd be interesting to hear what other people have to say, but that's what I'd like to know. And one school might say, I need more digital instruction. One might say, I need STEM. One might say, I need more TAs. I have no idea what they'd say, because again, each school has a different profile and different need. And but I feel like until we start understanding that and investing in that, we won't be able to do the things we say. Now, that's just one person's opinion.
Yep. Got it. Another thing on my mind, which I think is sort of related to what you're saying, is just looking at our spending with a lens on equity, right? And so how does our budget impact students? But sort of do our investments line up to our equity goals? And I think that's similar, Ms. Hauser, to part of what you were saying there about, if we have goals around equity, what does that mean for how much we're investing in different student populations. How does that look across schools? So sort of taking a look at how it all ends up playing out at the sort of student and school level.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, Sarah. So Hillary mentioned that at the Family Success Alliance, the readiness program, like the one that's at New Hope, costs about $750 per pupil. I'm going to round up. So say if we have 100 kids in each one of our elementary schools, that would be $75,000 per school to do that readiness program. If it's a good program and the principals like it and they like it, be prepared to invest, you know, $300,000 or $400,000 in that to make it happen. That's just an example of a way for us to invest in both literacy and equity. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I vote yes on that. Sight unseen.
One other thing that I think this committee could do some interesting work, and maybe it sort of relates to the Community Engagement Committee, in helping people understand our budget better. You know, maybe actually we as board members can help sort of work on that, communicate how we communicate about what is in our budget, where we do have flexibility and where we don't. Some of these questions even that we have been asking in this conversation, just helping people understand more about how we spend our money and what it goes towards. I think there's something there about that potentially we could do some work together on. And I see that we are at noon, and so any closing thoughts or words from anyone? Ms. Rath, I want to say thank you for that jam-packed set of information you prepared and shared with us. I'm thrilled to see the ways that we are spending our CARES money. I'm thrilled to see that child nutrition and school community relations, I think, are going to be in a healthy spot. It seems like so far this year. That's great. And it's really having all this context is going to be really helpful for us moving forward and making better decisions. So thank you. Looking forward to a great budget year.
Thank you.
I could, Mrs. Smiley. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rhonda.
I just wanted to say thanks for the very informative dialogue and the great questions. And I greatly appreciate the feedback in regards to the presentation and what you need. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And if I could, I too want to extend, I say thank you to Rhonda all the time. On the break, we pass each other going to the restroom, and I thank her, thank her. I want to publicly thank her. Yeah, so thank you, Rhonda. We appreciate you.
We're so lucky to have you leading this, Rhonda. Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.